Hello, gentle marketers. Welcome to the Gentle Business Revolution podcast, the show where we talk about marketing your business by disrupting the current marketing paradigm. I'm Sarah Zinacroce. I'm the host here. And as you may have noticed by now, I'm posting some more regular episodes right now in response to the current situation. If this is your first time here, welcome. You are listening to a raw episode, recorded conversation with my friend and mentor, Jenny Blake. And I want you to know that this is not your regular episode. I continue to post those on Fridays where we talk about gentle marketing. But right now, I'm wanting to serve you, my community of gentle souls, with resources that help us all deal with the current situation. This is also an episode that is not posted on my website, so I do recommend you subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app so you get notified about future extra episodes because I plan to continue posting those. I believe I have mentioned a few times in previous episodes that I am an empath and we use empathy a lot in gentle marketing. And I'm also a highly sensitive person, an HSP. And so is Jenny. So I reached out to her last week with the following words. Hi, Jenny. I'm following your example and post more frequent episodes on the podcast. Today, I recorded an EFT tapping session with a grief recovery specialist. I was thinking that part of what's difficult for me right now is the fact that I'm an empath and an HSP. Not only am I dealing with my own pain, I'm also feeling everyone else's pain. I know you are in the same boat, and so are many of our listeners. So I was just considering maybe recording an episode around that topic. Thoughts? Hugs, Sarah. Well, she thought it was a great idea, and so here we are today. We are recording this for both of our podcasts. Hers is at pivotmethod.com/podcast. We covered a lot of ground. It's an hour-long conversation, but if you're a fellow empath or HSP, I really think it's well worth listening to. So here's Jenny and I. Hi, Jenny. So good to speak to you.
Hi, Sarah. I'm so happy we're doing this. Thank you for the great idea to podcast on being an empath and a highly sensitive person during this time. There's no one I'd rather be having this conversation with.
I know you're the first person that came to mind as well, because we kind of talked about being introverted and both INFJs, but really, like living through this crisis right now has really reminded me how it's probably a different experience to live it as an empath and a highly sensitive person. So I reached out to you, and we're recording this conversation on March 24th, and we decided to kind of collaborate and then host it on both podcasts because it's an important conversation because we both think that we have a lot of empaths in the audience, right?
Well, I just love what you're doing with Gentle Business Revolution and your podcast and gentle marketing. There's so much that through our work together in Momentum and outside of it and what you're doing has inspired me along the way of we can do things differently. And I can't think of more of a time now than ever that people need and are craving a gentle approach to this in some way. And at the same time, the paradox is we need to be quite aggressive from a practical standpoint to stop the spread of coronavirus.
Right.
I know I'm here in New York City, the new global epicenter of it, but you got a head start because you're in Switzerland. What was your experience like seeing this all unfold once it came to Italy?
Yeah, I was just recording another podcast earlier today with a friend in Milan who kind of shared his experience, how it felt like in Italy and how the situation is today. And obviously, yeah, it's a scary place right now where he is. And what's interesting is that we always think, well, it's not going to be as bad. We are right next to Italy, literally, like it's very close by. And we kind of looked at what's happening in Italy from a distance. We're like, oh, this is horrible. But we never thought, this is going to hit us within a week. And so seeing kind of what's happening with other countries now. I shared just before we started recording, for me, I'm now in this place where, okay, I know it's bad. I compared it to a diagnosis when you're not sure, when you're sick, or someone who's sick, but don't know what they have. You don't have a diagnosis yet, and that is so, you feel so anxious because you don't know what it is. But once you do know, it's bad, but you have to deal with it. So that's kind of how I compared the development of this thing. Is like, I spent a week just being completely anxious because I had no idea, is it going to get really bad? And now we are in lockdown. This is our second week, complete lockdown, complete country. Schools have been closed for a week now, and nobody's supposed to go outside. Uh, and so we are just like, okay, this is bad, uh, and and we now have to deal with it. And so you kind of see what's happening in other countries, for example, the States, right, where the wave is still growing, and it felt like last week, it felt still like, oh, there's a lot of people who still don't realize that this is gonna hit them, just like we didn't realize how bad it's gonna hit us. And that, as an empath, feels so, I feel so frustrating, and I feel so powerless in this situation because there's no control over it.
Right. I was just saying that with Penny, that it's the control that's being really questioned right now. And we have to release it because
Mm-hmm.
we might want to control the situation or our business or how things are going to be. And there is no control and there's no certainty. And how do you lead and respond during a time like that? I thought of you this past weekend. So it sounds like we're on pretty similar timelines
I
because here
think
in
New
New York,
York
we,
is, yes.
yes, it's good, been getting it for about the same amount of time. I don't even know how long I've been on lockdown now because Michael and I kind of did that even before it was required by the state.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought of you and I thought of this podcast because we went to Whole Foods on Sunday, which is the closest grocery store to us. There was a line out the door, halfway down the block, security at both entrance and exit. And that was one thing. That was a real dose of reality because Michael had been going to the store while I've been podcasting every day.
Mm-hmm.
And and then I walked in the store, and the whole time that we were shopping, I felt so sad. I was just on the verge of tears, not for myself, for the situation. And I think part of what's happening for those who are empaths or highly sensitive is you pick up on the energy around you in the room, from other people, and from the collective,
Right.
not even in your physical location, the global collective consciousness. I felt so sad. I just wanted to cry. I was looking around. It was so sparse. You would think, under any other circumstances, it's like, woohoo, there's no one in here. Great. And we were so fortunate that it was stocked because the last time Michael tried to get groceries, the shelves were empty. And we actually didn't eat that much that week. I know that's weird to say. We weren't worried of be, going hungry the way that some people have that very serious concern.
Mm-hmm.
But that's when reality struck for him. And so for me, it was this deep sadness. And then the last few days, it just, that sadness comes and goes in waves. And it's not even entirely mine. Some of it is about just grieving various losses of what was. And that as much as we can try to be optimistic and hopeful for the future and the shift in consciousness and the sea change that is coming, there's still a grieving process. I quote Stephen Mitchell in Pivot, all change involves loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel it, and I feel it for myself personally, and I feel just a deep sort of collective sadness at the same time. I don't know if you've experienced that at all.
Yeah, I agree. It's this heaviness, right? And yeah, it does overcome me as well. And I guess, like, I'm at home with the kids now, and my husband is home, and so I have to still kind of keep an upbeat attitude because we know that when we look worried, then obviously the kids are going to be concerned as well. And right now, to be honest with you, the kids don't really realize what's going on in terms of they don't see the economical impact. They realize, okay, there's a lot of people getting sick, but they don't know the whole aftermath. So in a way, it's good for them. So I remember one morning last week I was reading this article about an Italian man who works here in the hospital in Switzerland, and he got a call that his mom was dying, and they had to go over there, and they didn't make it in time, and just how he told the story about how bad the whole situation was for all these old people that literally he said that Italy almost went back to the old ages, middle age, where people were being treated as witches, like they burned his mother's clothes before he could even recollect them, because there was so much fear around this virus. And so that made me so sad, and I was crying in the morning, and the kids come in, what's wrong? And sometimes it's not as easy to explain how deep things like that touch us as highly sensitive people, because even like outside of the virus time, like I cry with very easily during movies, and boys, they usually make fun of me, and I kind of now brush it off, but that's just how I react to not just sadness, also happy moments in movies. Is it the same for you?
Definitely. And I was just thinking maybe it's worth each of us saying what these two terms mean to us.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly part of being highly sensitive. So I think of empaths as, and it took me a while to realize that I was one, but I think of empaths as intuitive. And when you're sort of untrained, you're like a sponge. You're not just empathetic or sympathetic toward others, you actually feel what they're feeling, or you can feel into what they're feeling in a more visceral, experiential way. And the skill for an empath is to learn how not to be a sponge all day and not to just pick up everyone else's energy and get ping ponged around by other people's energy, because it's a very porous, energetic membrane, let's call it.
Right.
And then I think of highly sensitive person, and there's a book, Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine Aron. I think of highly sensitive as, well, exactly that. Like I cry very easily. I have a lot of emotional range up and down. I can be very happy, joyful, hopeful, optimistic. And I can also be deeply affected and sad and waylaid by what seem to others might seem like small setbacks. And that's partly what inspired me to write Pivot, because I didn't feel very resilient to change. Highly sensitive might even mean you're highly sensitive to sounds. I get really upset if someone's speaking too loudly and I'm in an enclosed space, or the TV's on too loud. I cannot watch violent movies. I'll never forget it. Honestly, I can't watch the local news. I wouldn't sleep at night. So I'm highly sensitive to the inputs, and now highly aware of what inputs I'm allowing into my consciousness. Because even if you think you're watching a horror movie, your subconscious doesn't know that. So for a long time, I've had to filter what comes in and who I surround myself by, because I will be deeply impacted by it. That's how I would define those two terms. And part of that in the context of this pandemic is feeling the collective waves of processing, and also having maybe a more intuitive sense or a hopeful sense at the same time. Like I hear the voice that says it's going to be okay. And even the conversations with Penny, she really brings that energy way more than me. I was kind of on that call, on that podcast episode, playing the role of like, well, how do we know, Penny? How do we know it's going to be okay? But if I really feel into my intuition, I do see how this is changing all of us, and that we will emerge stronger. And we do have an opportunity to lead now more than ever. But if you're highly sensitive, that's going to mean processing your own feelings, really, and everything that's coming in through your antenna. How
Mm-hmm.
do you think about those two terms, Sarah?
Yeah, I think, agree to everything you said. For me, also, something that I noticed more kind of over the years is, for example, music. I could simply cry to a when I see, not so much, just listening to YouTube or whatever music online, but if I see a concert and I see how much passion the artist puts into their craft, that can make me cry. Like, just the beauty of something like that can make me cry. And again, that's related to the high sensibility to also, I think what I've read is the creative side of the brain is kind of more active, and so that all goes together, right? The music, arts. Some people, some highly sensitive people are very more kind of impacted by art and paintings and things like that. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. Don't really know if it's a personality trait or how it's defined, but it's something that I remember when I was a child, my mom kind of had this term for me. She called me a mimosa. And a mimosa is this tree that has leaves that kind of, when you touch them, they close down, they kind of compact and close down. And 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 that meant, oh, you're very sensitive, right? And so that wasn't necessarily, in my mind, that was not a positive thing to be. And even when I first got to know my husband, he kind of commented on, oh, you're very sensitive and things like that. And so you start to think, oh, this is something bad about me. I should, especially like being a teenager and not being able to watch horror movies or whatever, all this aggression and violence on TV. And even in my family, I have two boys, and there's very often, every weekend, there's one movie that I will not watch with them, and so they always have to pick one mom movie, and then the other night they'll watch a guy movie where I know a lot of other women, they're able to watch, but me, I just know I won't be able to sleep after, because it has such a deep impact on me that I'm like, well, I'd rather not. I don't enjoy it, and then on top of that, I can't sleep at night. So yeah. So
You mentioned the boys. That
yeah.
reminds me, when Michael and I moved in together, he would play video games and I had no exposure. I mean, other than my brother growing up, my younger brother, but in recent years had no exposure. They're so graphic, they're so vivid, and they're so violent. So
Yeah.
many of them are so incredibly violent. The purpose of the game is you run around with a gun, killing people or animals or aliens or whatever it is. And he would get great joy. Some of the video games, like you're on a big trek, you're on a journey. And I would always love the nature scenes where he was in Egypt or in the forest, let's say. And early on in our relationship, he asked me to play with him. So at first I said, no, I won't play anything violent. Okay. We go to play some game, and I don't know, it had to involve shooting him. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't shoot him even in the video game, and nor would I shoot anyone else in the video game. Like, I just absolutely, my whole body said, no, I will
Mm.
not do this. I will not play acts that I'm shooting you, my now husband, or killing people for sport. Like, and so then he kind of, his awareness around it grew, and he started to realize, oh yeah, these are so violent. Oh, how come I never questioned that? And it kind of, I didn't ask him, don't play them, or I didn't tell him you shouldn't, but he also just kind of woke up to, wow, yeah, what am I doing? What am I putting into my brain? Because
Right.
it's easy not to question it.
No, it's for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I'm also thinking now that, with so many people suffering right now, how, like we kind of mentioned it before, that there's certain things that we can't control, and I think that is what is so important right now as an empath or highly sensitive person, to realize what we can focus on and what we can control, and then let go of the other things that we can't control. And I think it's also um, kind of our what I like to do now that I've come out of this frozen state, and I feel grounded now, and I feel like, okay, I'm here to help. I think that's also what empaths are good at, right? They're able to help, and and so it's really about this compassion and showing that you understand the pain of others, um, and the challenge is not to absorb their pain, right? So really, I don't know what you're doing, Jenny, in order to, being able to help and yet stay grounded and not absorb other people's pain. What are you personally doing for that?
Well, I love that you're asking that. I was going to ask you the same thing about what tactics or practices you've developed over the years.
Yeah.
One thing that's important for me is to just pause and say, is this my sadness or the collective?
Right.
And, or both, could be both. That can go multiple ways. Sometimes I might be thinking I'm picking up on the collective sadness and I'm really projecting. It's really my own sadness, something I'm not dealing with or haven't shown the light of awareness onto yet. And then other times I might think, gosh, why am I so sad today? This is bizarre. Nothing has happened. And I inquire within and there's no discernible reason. And then I realize, oh, it might be the collective sadness. And this can happen, by the way, even in a partnership, even in a relationship. I
Right.
think for empaths and highly sensitive people, it's really challenging if your partner's down, not to just immediately be down. Or
Yeah.
this goes to my codependency, but not to think, what did I do?
Yeah.
So sometimes I think, oh no, either what did I do? Or did I create that? I rewind in my mind things I said or did? And then even if I don't feel responsible and I know better, my adult self, sometimes I'll also wonder, oh, how can I fix this?
Hmm.
So I also think it's important to give others space, not to jump so much into helper rescuer mode. I have to pull myself back from this of thinking just because, Sarah, you mentioned shifting from frozen into helper mode. And,
Hmm.
and we may all cycle through frozen, sad, inspired, helper, frozen, sad. We don't really know how those cycles will go. But sometimes I need to say, it's okay. I don't need to jump in and fix anything here. I just need to show up and be authentic and be myself and be the change, be as grounded as I can be, take care of my health, physical health, mental, spiritual, emotional health as much as I can, and then show up authentically and honestly and transparently from that place without trying to fix things too much for others and without trying to prevent them from having their process.
I like that. And what I kind of jotted down was empower versus fix. Because, yes, I think if we get into the fixing mode, then we get overwhelmed. And that's another thing that highly sensitive people often deal with, is this sense of overwhelm. Because if you fix one person, then there's thousands of others that need help and with fixing right now. So that's not our role. We can't take on that role. What we can do is, once we grounded ourselves, is then help people empower themselves and say, look, here's some ideas, and that's how you can find back to clarity and groundedness. So help them empower themselves. But we kind of deviated, and I want to have you start again with the tools and routines that
Well,
you use.
yeah, those are two of them. I think so much of it is awareness
Mm-hmm.
because as an empath, it's easy to absorb or go into this automatic reaction. So for me, those are two tools: is asking, is this mine or is this the collective
Right.
or both?
Yeah.
It's about not jumping into other people's business too much, just focusing on my own groundedness. Because also, what I have found is if as an empath, if I'm not grounded, I'm very susceptible. I'm much more susceptible to anything I would see or hear in the media, or what how even a friend, someone can look at me with a split second micro expression and I'll absorb, well, I'll feel that negative energy, or I'll feel bad, or, it's really bizarre. So I know my groundedness is really important. And then I would also say, as a highly sensitive person, I need immense amounts of rest and recharging. So another thing, I had to remind myself this today, and I can't even say I'm getting this balance right just yet. It's especially a little tricky with the dog walks twice a day. So we are distancing, but he needs to go out, and I'm more tired than usual. I think
Mhm.
just the emotional journey of all this, I'm more tired and I need more rest, and I need way more than I think. And this is a common pattern in my life, that whatever I think I'm allowed, whatever dosage of rest seems appropriate, it's about double, triple, or quadruple. So I need to rest. Otherwise, as an HSP, I'll call it for short, I don't have the tools to respond very resiliently in the moment. I'm shorter temper. I misinterpret things. I can get more negative. So it's actually vital for me to rest and do less during a time like this.
Yeah, I
How
think.
about for you? What are some of your favorite
Mhm.
tips and tools?
Um, we're lucky in Switzerland that we still get to go outside. So even though we're being asked to stay at home, um, we can still go outside for walks and kind of be in nature. And I live next to a little forest with a river, and so I really yeah, treasure that usually, but now even more to be in nature. And nature is kind of an anchor for me because it shows me that this is going to be here for me. This is perfect just as is. There's nothing to fix in nature. If I touch a tree and look up to its crown, it's perfect as is. And that just helps me because usually when we're, working, then we always have things to fix and things to do. And in nature, you just are reminded that everything is perfect the way it is. So yeah, definitely. If you're still able to go outside and if you can go to a park nearby, I would definitely encourage you or maybe even to just look outside, and if you see a tree in front of your window, to realize that these are anchors for us that help us remind ourselves that this is here for you, for us. And maybe it's also that I had that conversation with a friend. It's also a message from nature that um, we're not as powerful as we think as humans, and kind of reminding us of that we're living on Mother Nature's planet, and that in a way, yes, there's the climate crisis, but at the same time, nature is very powerful, and so maybe this is a reminder that that's the way it is. So nature is one of them, and then I'm a practicing meditator, let's say, and I'm really saying practicing because it's not something that comes easy for me, but I have been practicing for about 4 years, and it does help me, even though I usually feel like, oh, that wasn't great, but at least I'm sitting there and I'm trying to go back to my thoughts, and so I think that has helped me a lot with sleep, because I can really now go to sleep very easily, where before that wasn't the case. And then the third one I'd mentioned is a gratitude journal. So really writing down most nights what I'm grateful for. And I didn't do it in the week when I was frozen because it felt like there was nothing to be grateful for. But now I'm reminded again of what we already have, all the things that we have, just focusing on those things, and really, yeah, pausing and reflecting on these inner things also that we have, and that we're actually quite lucky in that way.
There's so much great stuff in there. And your nature around your house sounds so beautiful. When you were sharing that, it reminded me. So sometimes it's challenging taking the dog out twice a day, but I have to say the dog owners are so happy because we get out of the house twice a day. We have fresh air. Really, we have the park to ourselves. That's selfish of me to say, but it's just we can let the dog off the leash. So, and then all the dog owners, we don't always go to the dog run, but Ryder really loves playing with other dogs. And then it's so delightful watching these dogs interact. So to tack onto the nature piece, the dogs don't know that anything's wrong. They're as delightful and playful and happy as ever.
Yeah.
And so that almost mechanism of we have to get fresh air once or twice a day, we have to move our bodies. I say once or twice because sometimes Michael and I alternate. And we're with this little being that it's as normal a day as any other, you know?
It's so
And
funny in Spain, they're on complete lockdown as well. I was talking to a client in Spain yesterday, and he's like, there's people with dogs who are now renting out their dogs so other people can have an excuse to
seriously,
to go for a dog walk. Yeah.
seriously, because the police are out in New York. I can see them driving by through the park and
Mhm.
looking, and it's as if they're looking. Do you have a dog? Do you have a reason to be out?
Yeah.
And because the only people that are out are either exercising, which is still okay if you keep 6 feet between each other,
Right.
the exercisers or the dog owners. So
Yeah.
it's true. I could see people kind of saying,
Getting
like, here,
creative.
borrow my dog. Yeah, exactly. Because then they don't crack down either. We're at least able to stand, like the owners will stand kind of far, owners, guardians will stand kind of far apart, but at least be able to say, how are you doing? How's this
Yeah.
affecting your work, your
Yeah.
family?
Hmm.
And you also mentioned the gratitude journal. Someone, I was just attending a workshop today, and she said, now is the time to do automatic writing, especially if you're highly sensitive, which most likely means highly intuitive as well. That anything, not just to release tension or stress, to get that, do the automatic writing, but also what are you, tune in your antenna to the collective right now. What does the world need? How
Hmm.
can you serve? How can you be a messenger during this time? What is going to come through your channel uniquely? And you might not know exactly. You certainly can't think that through with your brain. You just need to let the words flow from your hand to the page or typing on the computer, however it works for you. But I also think now is really an opportunity for HSPs once you get grounded and just manage your own fundamentals. There's a real call to serve during this time.
Hmm. Yeah, because we have this intuition that, like you said, I also feel that this is much needed and it will be okay. And there's so many people that don't feel that right now. And so to be able to tell them and yeah, maybe share it on your blog or wherever maybe you're not yet feeling comfortable sharing what you're writing, but at least writing it down for yourself, and then hopefully in the future share it also with a wider audience.
Don't you also feel, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but a sense of urgency that the world needs heart centered messages at this time? And I think there is a lot of that happening. But I wonder for you, Sarah, and actually, I'd be curious to hear your take on this because I know some service oriented and heart based business owners, as you know well from Momentum, are feeling a little self conscious. Well, is now the time to launch? Is now the time to do business? Is now the time to send messages to my mailing list? There is some overwhelm from every single business under the sun sending out
Mhm.
messages about coronavirus. And on the other hand, I feel a real deep need to counterbalance the fear side and the anxiety. And so I wonder what you would advise to others who are thinking, how can I serve during this time without seeming self serving?
Right. What I think right now is a great time to be visible, to be helpful, to uh, prepare for once we've gone through this, and we don't know right now when this is, but right now is the time to be helpful to your community and serve them. And I'm not saying that everything, all of your services should all of a sudden be free, um, but there is, I think, yeah, an opportunity first to help. And right now everybody is suffering, economically, so I don't think it's the best moment to kind of share your six-figure program or whatever, um, but I do think it's the time to serve and show up for them. What about you?
Yeah, I think there will come a point. Right now, it's all still very shocking. And as we said, Sarah, you and I are in parts of the world where it's happening a little earlier than certain other places.
Right.
So there's going to be this wave of awareness, I think, that sweeps through. Oh, this is real. This is really happening. Oh, this is really serious. I
Right.
mean, even just me watching the bubble grow in New York City day by day by day, and it gets bigger and bigger. And so that's going to happen around the country and around the rest of the world where people realize, oh, this is really serious. This is really going to affect me and us too. Everything is already being shut down. And then it might last 2, 3 months. We all hope it's shorter than that. It might last 6 months. We don't know. So I do think there's going to come a point where business has to resume because that's in everybody's best interest to keep us all afloat
Right.
during this time. But business will have to change. So I love what you're saying, that now's the great time to be visible, be helpful. What can you offer? What's your zone of genius? The thing that you do well and that you love. So it's at the intersection of it's unique, you're uniquely good at it, and you love it. It brings you joy. For me, it is podcasting, not writing, it's podcasting. And it's not video, it's podcasting. So, how do you hone in on the one way you like to serve? And then building on that without knowing where it's going to take you. So having a little faith in the process. And when business does resume, it's about getting creative. So how can you do the work you need to do in a new way? And leaders are going to have to ask that question. Organizations will have to ask that question. Think about how many companies are going through a major pivot right now where they would have never let their entire workforce work from home. They would have never allowed that. They would have said, we can't collaborate that way. It's inefficient. Enough work won't get done. Well, now they have no choice. So now they're saying, oh, okay, how do we continue to be collaborative and innovative? How do we, without falling into fatigue? Because I'm also seeing a quadrillion Zoom sessions right now, and I can't stand being on video all day. I feel so frozen in place in front of my computer. It drives me nuts. So I'm going to record a podcast soon on screen fatigue and basically imploring people, do not make every meeting a video meeting or people are going to lose their mind.
It's true. And I also think there is going to be actually a sense of wanting to do more, more, no more webinars, for example, I'm thinking, because we do want to be heard and seen, and we do want to all, be able to contribute and not just be sitting in the sidelines and sit there and listen to the guru. So in a way, I think these 2 months will have a huge impact on how we collaborate. And by collaboration, I really also mean, these big businesses, but also kind of the marketing gurus who up till now, they just excluded everyone else, and it was just them who were running the show. But now everybody is going to know how to use Zoom, for example, and everybody's learning how to communicate via these tools. They want to be heard and seen. They don't want to just attend all these anonymous webinars anymore. That's what I see coming. It's like we now know how this online world works. Let us participate.
Absolutely. And people are going to step into their own leadership shoes.
Yeah.
So it might be learning. I don't mind webinars and being a passive recipient sometimes, but I have an outlet. I have the Momentum community, I have the podcast. So I think if somebody doesn't have that, they're going to feel a lot of people will feel very called to create that or to finally get that thing off the ground or
Right.
finally hit publish, even if it isn't perfect. This is not a time for perfectionism because nothing can be perfect. None of us can know what's happening. And if you sit on things for too long, the world's going to change around you. It's not going to be relevant anymore. So I also think this is going to call people to rise. And when you're passively receiving content, great. That's kind of part of the resting and recharging, unless it's a business meeting. But for me, I'm so grateful. Many of my yoga studios, even ones I haven't been able to get to for years, are now streaming their classes. I'm so thankful that I can take from some of my favorite teachers from my room. I'm so thankful for the content providers who are providing interesting, thought-provoking content during this time. A lot of us, it is a time to pause and think about what really matters. And I love the content that's been oriented toward that. And I'm always the type that I'm thankful to watch it on the recording, But what you said, I think that you're right. People are going to want to make sure that they're also active.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be certain formats or certain types of calls where people want to be seen and heard. And it's so important how you just called that out. I'm really glad that you did.
You also mentioned self leadership, which I think is I see it with my 13-year-old. They are now being asked to get organized and do all the studying from home. They get a ton of emails at the beginning of the week and could easily lead to overwhelm. But so they're being asked to step up, and I told my son this morning, I'm like, well, this is exactly, you're learning skills that you would never learn at school. You're learning them now, and they will help you so much for later, because you're self-leading yourself now, and that is going to happen not just for scholars, but for everybody, right? It's like you're on your own. So many people have never worked from home. The two of us, we've been doing this for a long time, so it's no big deal. But I talk to people who, they don't know how to organize their days, and I think you mentioned it on one of your podcasts as well. It's like you have to have structure, and how do you really organize your day? So this self leadership is really going to be also one of the big changes, I believe.
And what would you say for empaths and the HSPs in particular? What do you think the unique challenges are going to be for empaths and highly sensitive people to step up during this time? And then what do you think the advantages are?
Let me think. Well, what comes up is this overwhelm. So that's something that we, I think, are more prone to. So I think we need to be very careful with, again, what is our own and what can we control, and what can we not control. So for example, if I'm an employee and I can't all of a sudden feel responsible for everyone on my team. I still need to say, okay, I'm responsible for my stuff, and somebody else does not know how to get organized, then I can't help everyone. So yeah, I see that as kind of a potential risk. So be very mindful with your energy, and again, what you can focus on. And as what was the second question? I think as
The
how the
advantages.
advantages, right? um I guess the intuition comes up again, where maybe not the intuition, but what I feel as well, as maybe that has more to do with the INFJ side, that we're also both this self motivation, so this intrinsic motivation, that is definitely uh, an advantage that I see, that I don't have a problem with, being motivated and organizing my days. What would you say is this intrinsic motivation? Is that something specific to empaths, or not
Well, I
necessarily?
love that you said that. I didn't think about that because I do have that in Gretchen Rubin's framework. What does she call it? The upholder?
Uh-huh.
That the one that upholds their own goals, and they don't really need outside accountability to do
Yeah,
things or get
yeah,
things done.
yeah.
Yeah, there's the upholder, the questioner. I'm a little bit of both those. Then there's the obliger that does much better with an outside person asking for things. They do better committing to others than to themselves. And the rebel. The rebel just questions everything, and you can't tell a rebel what to do, which I married one. um, yeah, I love what you said. I definitely think intuition is a superpower right now. If you're an empath and you're highly sensitive, you can really get a subtle, nuanced read on what, not just what's happening, but what the world needs. And I think you're going to feel that more acutely, more specifically. You can tune into your own journey, your own ups and downs. And I know I've certainly been doing that. And I just, a couple years ago, was working on Pivot, which is my second book. There was a point where I just realized, oh, I think I go through certain things a little early. And if I just pay attention to my journey and my process and how I solve things, that will be helpful for people. It
Mhm.
took me time to get there because I just thought, well, this is what everyone is going through, or this is what everyone has solved. And I do think if you're an empath or highly sensitive, you may have a slight earlier jump on certain things by you experiencing them. And at a deeper level, you can serve and solve and share at a deeper, more intricate, or more specific level.
Mm. Yeah, that I always need to be reminded of that, because I do truly always think everybody else feels the same things or sees the same things, and sometimes I just think it's Tony, my husband, who just doesn't have the same kind of sensors. But yeah, when I, like you said before, when someone walks next to you and you can just tell that they've just received some terrible news, or they're just, not in a good place, and the person next to you, and usually it's my husband Tony, he's like, what are you talking about? How can you, why did, I'm like, well, just something on their face, or yeah, I can just tell. And so I think the same applies, I guess, to the bigger picture, the yeah, this idea of what people need right now. And it's very interesting that you say that. Thanks, Jenny.
I love what you said too about don't try to boil the ocean, basically, and be specific about how you want to help and who you want to help during this time. So it's
Yeah.
probably overwhelming to try to say, well, I mean, I will say my personal mission for a long, long time has been to be as helpful as possible to as many people as possible. But within that, I'm not trying to be the news media at the same time that I'm trying to be a medical professional, at the same time that I'm trying to be an author of a book on change. I can't be all those things. There are certain things that I don't have the expertise, the experience, or the call to do, basically. And so I have to look and say, who can I be most helpful to and how? For me, it's companies, it's individuals, it's tends to be people working in information related jobs, things where that work is in front of the computer, whether it's an entrepreneur or maybe it's big tech companies. And then how? So again, I can bring in guests on my podcast, but I have to stay focused on what I can do, which is just what topics or what am I experiencing around this and how do I talk about that in an open, authentic, real time, in the moment way. And so that's something we're going to need to ask. Otherwise, it can be overwhelming and paralyzing. That if you try to be all things to all people during this time, it's just going to be overwhelming because there is so much need around the world. And for me, the flip side of that is I have to drop the guilt. Sometimes I feel very guilty and privileged as a in doing this work. I feel, how dare I talk about working from home tips while people are dying, or how dare I have a lightness in my voice or record this portion of an essay in a joyful way. People are dying. So I do have this voice in my head that will sort of like harangue me and says, like, how dare you be happy right now? People are dying. How dare you talk about these? How dare you move on to these other topics and not constantly caveat it? Even I was very self-conscious telling you the Whole Food story, because what a privilege to just get to be well, get up and go to Whole Foods and have a Whole Foods down the street and have the funds to buy the groceries from Whole Foods. So there's just this whole chain of privilege, visible and invisible, that I'm really aware of. And I just have to make the choice to serve who I can, and that, and not get bogged or weighed down too much by the heaviness and the extremes of what's going on.
Yeah, you mentioned so protecting our energy, I think is super important, and that's somehow related to guilt, because if I, say no to another webinar that, or another Zoom call that I could be doing, um, eh, again for free, and again putting this up, it always takes us time as well, and yes, we have this really drive to help, but at the same time, if we're, and I know this from experience from my overgiving burnout, which I talk about a lot on my podcast, it's like, well, as empaths, giving comes so naturally to us that actually what we need to learn is how to protect our energy and not feel guilty about protecting our energy. So when people ask me, could you do this, could you do that, I will always first check my energy and how long will it take me to put this up. Is it an easy thing I can do and to help? Then yes, I will most definitely do everything I can. However, time is so important, and especially right now, I have a family that is now home. I need to cook more, etc., etc. So always thinking about protecting my energy first as well, because it's kind of like the mask on the plane. If we don't have the energy for ourselves, then we can't help anymore either.
I'm so glad you mentioned overgiving burnout and the guilt or dropping the guilt around saying no and being discerning with time. I've noticed myself as well as just the influx of communications overall. So much of it's very positive, people checking in, how are you doing? Especially now in New York, it's coming from a lot of places.
Right.
That just gets overwhelming for me in general, even when we're not in a pandemic, is just communication and pings and messages. Um, but I've noticed there are certain requests that have come in where I feel it's not an instant yes, it's not a whole body yes. And then I feel a little guilty. Well, shouldn't I be helping during this time? Shouldn't I be saying yes? And what I'm trying to do is find a win win. So, or a way to honor my own intentions during this time. So, for example, you asked me to do this podcast, and I was so happy for the topic. And I just said, I'd love that. And can I release it on mine as well? Perfect. Someone wrote and said, can we kind of pick your brain on remote working? And I said, why don't you and your team get huddle together, send me your questions, and I'll record it as a podcast because I want to do a session on that anyway.
Mm.
So I'm trying to shift because, especially today, before some of those requests came in, I realized I've got to clear my calendar. I cannot just go into my default calendaring mode and pack this thing up. I need extra time, extra space, just like you said, both for emotional wellness, taking care of things on the family and the home front, and just the space to really process and feel into what's happening. I think it
Right.
would be such a miss if we just steamrolled over this space and quiet and time with a bunch of meetings, which is so tempting right now because everyone wants to schedule meetings because everyone's home. So I think there's going to be a big call for all of us to strengthen our no muscles or strengthen our pivot the request muscle of how can you shift that into something that you might already be doing.
Yeah, exactly. Using our time effectively and efficiently, and yet that always comes with a little guilt trip as well. Am I just, taking advantage of the situation? But no, you're not. And I think I've mentioned on my podcast, Essentialism, the book by Greg McCowan. That really changed my life, and saying no in a gentle way, because we can't say no in a gentle way, and I think that's also what we're being asked to do here.
Yeah, I love the book. I love Essentialism too. It's such a good one. I haven't had Greg on the Pivot podcast, but
Oh, you should.
oh, he's I know he's so good with how he talks about the importance, and that every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else.
Yeah.
So you better get real clear on what that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was thinking, kind of to wrap it up here, I would love for you to, you have a big audience in the US. My audience is a bit all over the place, but there's definitely people in the US as well. Knowing what we know, being a bit ahead of the curve, maybe we can just kind of share, because this episode on my show is going to publish, very soon, tomorrow. Um, Share, what would you like to share with your fellow Americans, and I would probably include also British, because in England they're still kind of behind on the curve as well, and maybe social distancing is not yet so much in the on people's minds. So what would you share with people?
Yes, well, it's a great question, and in addition to all the things, there's like, oh, wash your hands, I'm not even going to go into all the
Yeah, no.
things that we're already being asked to do.
Right.
So I'll speak to the more emotional side, I guess. I would say know that there will be a roller coaster. I mean, I would never want to project that. Some of you might not have any downs, that's fine. But there may be an emotional roller coaster. You may feel extra drained, extra tired, extra sad. You may pick up on the energy of others around you, even when you're not feeling that way. So, the biggest thing I would say is as the wave of social distancing and shelter at home starts to go to where you are, really take the time to get quiet before you even jump into action and jump into trying to turn your mindset around and make the most of this. Let yourself be. This is such a powerful time, and there's so many gifts that are going to come in. We don't even know what they are yet. What this is really it's not a short-term thing. So take the time to be and rest and process and go slower than you think, and trust that when you are moved to act, you will know. When you have the energy and the inspiration, ride those waves, absolutely. And you feel a specific call to serve, go for it. But don't put pressure on yourself to get there sooner than you need to. And take extra time to rest, because this will be more tiring than I think you can anticipate.
Yeah,
How
it's
about you?
yeah, it's so interesting. I really had this week where I thought I'll never finish this book. I don't have the motivation. Like it was like this huge wet blanket was thrown over me, and yeah, like I didn't recognize myself because usually I'm, someone very driven. I get up in the morning and go straight to work, and I couldn't do anything. So yeah, really give yourself permission to just be and realize that this we've never experienced this. So this is very different, and it can be very scary, and not just because of the health issues, but also because of the unknown of the economic impact. So I would definitely say, yeah, give yourself permission to be, and then kind of like what we discussed, once you feel like, okay, now I think I can help, you don't have to solve this problem. You can't. So just focus on the few people where you think you can help, and kind of apply everything we shared on this podcast, like protect your energy and help when it makes sense to help.
I would add two more things that um, if you feel yourself getting disappointed that this was going to be my year, this was going to be my decade. I had all these plans for 2020. So it reminded me, Sarah, when you talked about the book. And for me, I weirdly booked my first airport run of Pivot to be in airports, 50 airports, May, June, and July. And the airports are practically vacant now. So
Right.
there's very bizarre. But I think to myself, well, what was important to me about that marketing experiment? I almost never do any outbound marketing. So that's what's funny about it. And I think, oh, it was my year to step up and really be center stage with Pivot and really claim my space. Okay, well, that's happening just in a very unexpected way. It's as if the universe is playing the opposite game with us, not with our intentions and our vision of how we want to show up, but the circumstances around that have now done an almost a 180. So, my inquiry to all of you, my invitation would be look at the intentions that you set before all of this started happening and ask, well, how is this change in circumstances actually even more ripe uh, or fertile ground for me to work toward those intentions and just try on that shift in perspective?
Yeah, I have a friend who was supposed to host a huge conference about the future of business, and it was all about, using more intuition and heartfelt business, and so it got postponed. And of course, yeah, there's a year of work and a big financial commitment, and she was very disappointed. But at the same time, it will be so much better because people will be so ready for that message in the fall or in the winter when the conference will happen again. And I think it's the case for many of our projects, and my book, hopefully, and other things that heart-centered people are working on, because this is opening our hearts, this whole
It's so
thing right
true.
now. It's so needed in a way.
And maybe you're going to get insights for your book that you would have never gotten if
Yeah.
this weren't happening, or you're getting the time and space and the almost permission. It's now is the time for deep work
Yeah.
but we will have to carve that out. And
Mm.
there was a second thing I was going to say about what I would say to people where it hasn't quite hit fully yet. But you know what? It just slipped out of my mind. So it must not be important. If I remember, I'll put it in the show notes.
It will come back. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, how should we end this? Do we want to just share how people can find you and I share where people can find me?
Sure. That sounds great.
All right, you go first.
I've been doing a whole series of daily podcasts now on pivoting around a pandemic. You can find all of those at pivotmethod.com/podcast. And there's a free toolkit of exercises. They're not pandemic related or anything, but just to work through exercises from the book Pivot. And that's at pivotmethod.com/toolkit. And for all of you solopreneurs, which I know, Sarah, you have many in your audience, you can go to pivotmethod.com/FFT is my free up founder time. It's a free mini course for small business owners. And I think you'll find it particularly helpful during this time where so much of the nature of our work is shifting.
Yeah, and I think it's also kind of related to the essentialism. Really make sure that you're only working on the essentials and kind of cutting back on the non-essentials. Yeah, wonderful. All right, so I have a podcast that is called The Gentle Business Revolution. You can find that either on iTunes or at thegentlebusinessrevolution.com. And my main website is sarahsanecroce.com.
Amazing. Sarah, thank you so much for reaching out to do this. And big thanks to everybody who's here listening.
Thank you so much for coming on. I think this has been an amazing conversation, and hopefully it'll be helpful to fellow empaths and HSPs.
I certainly hope so too. And if you listen and you have extra tips that we haven't covered, I would love to hear. So let us know on either of our two channels.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everybody.
I hope you got some value out of this conversation. Thanks so much for listening. If you know other empaths or HSPs that would find this conversation helpful, please consider sharing it with them. Thank you. And tomorrow I'm back with a regular episode talking about the P of product and bringing in the concept of beauty as well. Until then, be well and speak to you soon. Bye.